Hello, welcome to KGS, and we are supposed to talk about the history and the segment, both prelims and the mains. And before we start, let us understand the importance of this subject. Whenever we say that any subject is a father of all the subject, but basically history is mother of all the subjects. And whatever the discipline you read today, you study today, it had all origin in the history. And this is the reason why the importance of this subject always preferred in any examination. The nation which does not have the history, the existence of the nation is always very much questioned, unstable. But as far as the country like India, we have the rich legacy of the thousands years of the past. And this is the reason why we say that India, rather than a nation, it is a civilization. And we have to study this part of the civilization in all dimensions of social, economic, and political, so that we can carry forward this nation up to the next generation. So here in the civil services examination also, in paper 1, we have the history as a major component, major subject. And obviously, when you study history, its length and time is huge. So whenever we define the subject, then it is not a study of the past, but only those events of the past which have great impact on future. So ever since man became human, you can start history till 2023, and in this entire span of time, there are so many events which actually affected the world order, social, economic, and political as well. So only those events of the past which have great impact on future, social, economic, and political pattern. And also, history is what historians say. It is analysis of the facts by the historians. Historians making the relevant fact historical and irrelevant fact unhistorical. Thousands of the facts are there in the ancient India, medieval India, which decoded by the historian. And to make it easily understandable and to make it relevant for the historical progress. So in civil services examination, in Indian history, we have three major segments: ancient India, medieval India, and the modern India. There was a previous trend that modern India was having the more focus in examination, whether it is a prelims or the mains. But now these days, ancient and medieval is equally very important. Means all the 5 fingers are equal. You can see in the historical understanding. So ancient is also getting proper weightage, medieval is also getting proper weightage, and so as with the modern India. So therefore, you have to distribute your time, you have to distribute your length of the study equally in all parts of the Indian history. And also one very important part is that you cannot compartmentalize history. You must try to relate history with all the modern trends, modern events as well. It is very easy. So those who have a good command over the international politics or the national affairs, it had its historical background. If you want to connect any historical things with the modern changes, that always score a very nice segment in the paper 1 examination, paper 1. So altogether, students had to take care of some of the important things. that it's not a traditional method of studying the history, but apply some modern concept and try to relate the modern event with the historical fact. And that way you can score too much. And that is the reason why history is also a very dynamic subject. It's not static. Those who understand that it is a traditional ways of studying history in a very static ways, it is not things of the past. Secondly, look, India, it was known as golden word for the golden bird, not point of view of the Indian historians or the Indian nationalists, but most of the ancient Greek literatures is unanimous on this issue that India was a golden bird. Obviously, the reason was that we were the largest exporter of consumer goods. The consumer goods was exported from India to the world, particularly the Roman world, and bullions was keep on flowing. This balance of trade is very much understandable. So bullions in the balance of trade was in favor of India. Then secondly, in medieval India also, even after the advent of Mughal, the trends of this balance of trade continued, and Mughal greatly associated with the European trade, and thereby the volume of the export of India had increased significantly, and obviously the bullions also started flowing too much. So therefore, the medieval India had added prosperity in India as well, and particularly after the advent of Mughals. But when the Europeans came to India, the only and only thing, particularly the British, the only and only thing is that British had tried to reverse the balance of trade, right? And thereafter, the India became importer of consumer goods, and our bullions started flowing out of this country, and this trend was disaster. This is called colonial period, and this is called colonialization, the British period, or the Europeans, those who dominated in the political scene of this country. Okay, fine. So therefore, the golden bird had turned into bird. And if you try to understand the data, there is a rough estimate, and thereafter you have a clarity that how this transformation had taken place. 1757, 25% of the world GDP was alone constituted by India. 25% of the world GDP. And our percentage of the world trade, demand of the handicraft, because that time there was no industrial revolution, so handicraft was the only thing, and India contributed 50% of the demand of handicraft in this world. 50%. So you can understand the power of Indian economy. But my dear, in 1947, it had reduced to, the Indian GDP had turned into 4%, and our trade had reduced to 1%. Look at the transition of GDP of India in 1757, 25% to 4%, and then world trade 50% to 1%. This is called colonialism, right? And there is a good thing to understand that India became victim of British imperialism in order to serve the colonial interest of Britain. So ever since British transformed into political power, the only and only objective of the British, how to transform India from exporter of goods to importer of goods. And thereafter, the bullions of India started flowing out of this country. This is enough to explain that how golden bird had transformed into bird and how colonialism had ruined the effect. Secondly, Britishers never came to India with the objective of becoming the political power. It is circumstances in India persuaded Britain to aspire for political power. This is a billion-dollar statement. That what circumstances? It's very clear. I told you what? That Britishers never came to India with the objective of becoming the political power. It is circumstances in India persuaded Britain to aspire for political power. Even look at this story that Gandhi, when he was working in South Africa, how this story is related to this statement. Then Gandhi went to England to highlight the problems of India in South Africa, because Gandhi understood that India is a British subject. So British government must look into the issue of the Indians in South Africa. So when Gandhi reached South Africa, he also contacted Leo Tolstoy, and he sent a message that, sir, I am doing such and such thing in South Africa for the Indians. Then Leo Tolstoy replied him, good luck. So when Gandhi was coming back to South Africa from London, so on the deck of the ship, he decided to write some of the editorials, and that editorial for his newspaper Indian Opinion. He was publishing the newspaper Indian Opinion in South Africa. So that editorial of Indian Opinion was recompiled in a book, and it was known as Hind Swaraj. So Hind Swaraj, in his book, Gandhi categorically said that why British became political power in India. Gandhi said, Indians were very much allured by the industrial civilization of the West. Indians were very much attracted to the industrial civilization of the West. And thereafter, this is the reason why, in order to modernize ourselves, Indians readily accepted the British rule in India. We never opposed any kind of adventure by the Britishers in India, because we understood that coming in contact with the Britishers, we will modernize our country. All the social evils will go away. We accepted English. Same sentence I was trying to relate when I said that British never came to India with the objective of becoming the political power. It is circumstances in India persuaded Britain to aspire for the political power. This is the million-dollar statement. And how Gandhi also observed the same thing, that how Britishers transformed into political power in his book, Hind Swaraj. So, making the things very interesting at all level, then entire subject will become very interesting. So, this is approach, how to create the interest from my side and from your side. And thereafter, we will deal with the subject in a very easy way. This history is type of thing. The history is type of thing in which if you have developed the interest, you can remember n number of the facts. So those who had apprehension that in history we have to remember the fact, they are on the wrong side of the preparation, because in history we have nothing to remember. In history we have to understand the events, and thereafter with the events you can relate the facts yourself. So facts will automatically come. It's not the memorization. So you have to understand the story model and causes and the consequences. If you know these three things together, there is bundles of the facts always be on the tapes, whether it is a date or the events. So my position is, my point is that you first understand the sequence of the events and then facts will automatically put inside. This is the way that you study history. Otherwise, when you remember the fact first and then analysis later, it will become a never ending fact and you will never end and you will finish the history. History will always be burden for you. So there is a technique, there is a methodology that we will use while teaching history, right? Some other method is, that is a graph. If you understand the graph, the dimension and the variation, suppose those who had studied history at home, they are very much aware that British turned into political power in 1757 after long years of the trading organization. As a trading organization, it had turned into political power. And then East India Company, a private company of England, ruled India for 100 years. Rather, you can say India is a classic British colony. In colony, you have to exploit, and classic British colony ready to be exploited. That is what is difference between the colony and the classic colony, and India is a classic British colony. Then at the same time, we have some other fundamentals as well. That after 100 years, there was a revolt called Revolt of 1857. And thereafter, the British Crown started rule over India. And British Crown ruled India for the next 90 years. But in these 90 years, how British was trying to consolidate its position, or what was the political position of the British, and how the Indian nationalism gave dimension to that, gave dimension to the Indian national movement. This graph is side by side. So I am taking the chance to explain the graph, then you will understand that how mathematical this history is, right? So let us understand the graph first. In 1858, the rule of the British Crown had started, and India became under the rule of the British Parliament. Then the policy of British government was to consolidate its position in India. To consolidate its position in India. So policy of the British government was policy of consolidation. Policy of consolidation. And immediately after 1858, the response from the Indian side that we started developing as a nation. So rise of nationalism was parallel to the policy of consolidation by the Britishers. So the tools and mechanism used by British to exercise control over India, similar tools and mechanism used by Indians, that led to the rise of nationalism. Definitely, India developed the consciousness of a nation under the British impression. Otherwise, India had become a divided geographical expression. Okay, fine. Then after establishment of Congress in 1885, after establishment of Congress in 1885, nationalism had transformed into Indian national. Nationalism had transformed into Indian national movement. Okay, so once the Indian national movement had started, the British government also shifted the policy towards India. This is called policy of divide and rule. Divide and rule. After establishment of, after Indian national movement had started, British government wanted to break the solidarity of Indian national movement, and therefore started the policy called policy of divide and rule. And then advent of Gandhi in Indian politics. 1915, Gandhi came to see the Indian politics, and then he transformed Indian national movement into mass movement. The strength of the mass movement had increased. With the advent of Gandhi in Indian politics, Indian national movement transformed into mass movement. So, the British government had to respond to the rising consciousness of the masses. Therefore, in 1920, when British came across with the first mass movement, that is non-cooperation movement, British government decided to compromise with the mass. British government always decided to have a talk with the Gandhi, giving some concession. And when colonial power started compromising, it means its control mechanism is deeping down. And therefore, after 1920, the policy of compromise, finally in 1947, its control became zero, and 1947, Indian nationalism suits to independence. This is independence. So how this crossover, how the change of the position after 1920 had happened because of the advent of Gandhi in Indian politics, because of the beginning of the mass movement. So this entire scenario, which you can see in the graph, that consolidation led to the rise of nationalism, Indian national movement forced British to go for divide and rule, and then mass movement forced British to go for the policy of compromise. So whenever we study in detail, we can decode all these segments, and thereafter to reach the level of independence, and thereafter the British will force to quit it. So this graph is beautifully explained in a book of Bipin Chandra. Normally you read India's Struggle for Independence. This is the beautiful compilation for the civil services, for the history in fact, and it gave lots of glimpse about that. So therefore, in this segment, you can see that Bipin Chandra said this is called war of position. A war of position. That is position of war, not position of war, war of position. Both nationalism and the control mechanism of the British were trying to hold the position. And after 1920, the war of position came in favor of Indian national movement. So this is how we study the panorama. And so as in ancient India, so as in medieval India, or in world history also, it's very interesting. Post-independence is full of the story that everybody know, but you should know the inside of the story. That is a very good part. So I will try to explain some vital thing in the coming session, that why history is so important for the civil services examination, and that means how it gain importance in the paper 1 of GS, how it gain importance in the essay, or understanding the social issues also. So it's a vital paper for your preparation, and this is the reason why. And every civil servant must know history, otherwise would not be a very effective civil servant. Until unless you know the history and the culture of any part of the India or India as a whole, you cannot be a better bureaucrat. So before you can aspire to do something good and exceptional for this country, the first and primary lesson is that you must learn the history, right? So thank you so much. We will tune it for you next coming session. Thank you so much.